Yeah.
was also a very fun event. Do you remember where that was?
I do. It was.
The moment Rachael Ray stepped forward to speak, something felt different. Her smile, usually bright, warm, and effortless, seemed weighed down by a sadness she could no longer hide. For years, millions woke up to her laughter, her recipes, and her steady reassurance that no matter how chaotic life felt, a good meal and a good heart could make things better. But today, her voice trembled in a way no one had ever heard. And when she finally revealed what she had been carrying in silence, the world stopped. This wasn't a new cookbook announcement or a feel-good update from her kitchen studio. This was something far heavier, something she had kept hidden behind the cameras for far too long. Fans knew she had endured hardships, especially after the devastating fire that destroyed her home, but no one imagined how deeply the aftermath had shaken her. And now, after months of rumors, whispers, and quiet concern, Rachael Ray has finally broken her silence. Her confession was heartbreaking, raw, and far more serious than anyone expected. It wasn't the kind of news her audience was prepared to hear. And as the truth spread across social media within minutes, fans were left in disbelief, asking the same question: what happened to the woman who spent her life lifting everyone else up yet couldn't say a word about her own pain until now? The moment Rachael Ray appeared on screen, longtime viewers sensed something had shifted. Her familiar warmth was there, but behind it lingered a heaviness that even the brightest television lights couldn't hide. For nearly 2 decades, she had been the comforting face of daytime television, someone who could walk into a chaotic kitchen, whip up a meal in minutes, and somehow make millions feel like everything would be okay. Yet today, her tone carried a tremor, as if the weight of unspoken truths pressed on every breath she took. She began by thanking her audience, the people who had grown with her from the earliest days of 30-minute meals to the sprawling media empire she built. But then her voice softened. She admitted that while she had spent her career lifting others, she had been struggling to keep herself afloat. The world saw her rebuild after the devastating fire that destroyed her home, but few understood what that loss truly meant. She described the eerie silence that followed, the absence of laughter, the void where memories used to exist, the ache of losing the space where she had celebrated milestones and mourned heartbreaks. It wasn't just a house that burned. It was the center of her life. She revealed that she had tried to stay strong, plastering on smiles for the camera even on days when she could barely get out of bed. She poured herself into work because it was easier than sitting still and confronting the emotional ruins left behind. But eventually, the cracks formed. Nights of restless sleep became normal. The pressure to remain upbeat grew unbearable. The simple joy of cooking, the thing that once brought her comfort, felt like a chore under the shadow of grief she could no longer ignore. Then came the end of her long-running talk show, a moment that broke the hearts of millions who relied on her daily presence. But Rachael explained the truth behind the decision. It wasn't driven by ratings or network politics. It was driven by her own exhaustion. She confessed that she no longer had the strength to pretend everything was fine. The cameras captured her smile, but off-screen she was unraveling, worn thin by endless expectations and personal battles no one else could see. The hardest part of her revelation came next. For the first time, Rachael opened up about the health concerns she had been keeping private. She didn't give every detail, some things were still too raw, but she admitted she had been ignoring symptoms that needed attention, pushing past physical warnings in an effort to keep going. It took her team, her husband, and a few emotional breakdowns for her to finally accept that she couldn't continue living at a relentless pace. Her body and mind were begging for rest. She told her audience that she had reached a breaking point, the kind that forces a person to reevaluate everything they thought they could endure. She realized she had spent years caring for everyone except herself, and the cost of that self-neglect was finally too high to ignore. The words came slowly, at times shakily, but every sentence carried the weight of truth she had been hiding for far too long. Despite the heartbreak woven through her message, there was also gratitude. She spoke about the people who supported her, the handwritten letters from strangers who reminded her she wasn't alone, the fans who continued to believe in her even as she questioned herself daily. She expressed overwhelming appreciation for her husband, who stood by her side through sleepless nights, uncertain mornings, and the quiet moments when grief nearly swallowed her whole. Rachael admitted she didn't know exactly what the future held, But she was finally giving herself permission to step away from the spotlight and focus on her health, her family, and the healing she had postponed for too long. For the first time in years, she was choosing rest over routine, truth over pressure, and vulnerability over pretending. As she finished speaking, there was no flashy sign-off. No trademark cheerfulness to smooth over the emotional edges. Instead, there was honesty, the kind that makes even strong people tremble. Her message wasn't easy to hear, and it wasn't what anyone expected. But it was real. And in that moment, millions finally understood that even the most beloved public figures can carry unspoken burdens far heavier than anyone imagines. As the reaction to Rachael Ray's announcement spread across the internet, messages of love and concern poured in by the thousands. But behind the scenes, Rachael was navigating something far more complicated than public sympathy. She had spent years being the strong one professionally, personally, and emotionally. Now, for the first time, she was confronting the reality that she couldn't simply push through this of her life with positivity alone. Rachael described how, after the fire that destroyed her home, she tried to pretend that loss was just another obstacle to overcome. She rebuilt the property, renovated the spaces, and returned to filming as if nothing had happened. But the truth was far more painful. Every corner of the new home felt like an echo of what had been lost. The hallways seemed quieter. The rooms didn't carry the same warmth. The memories that once filled the air had been replaced by the constant reminder of vulnerability. She explained that trauma doesn't fade just because a new structure stands where the old one fell. And as she pushed forward, she began to realize she had never truly allowed herself to grieve. She had treated her emotions like an inconvenience, something to be shelved until she had time, which between filming, writing, and running multiple businesses, she never did. Her days were consumed by obligations, deadlines, and the relentless pressure of an industry that demands perpetual energy. But eventually, the constant pace became unsustainable. Her body responded first fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure, headaches that lingered for days, and a new heaviness that sat on her chest like an unwelcome guest. She shared that she started forgetting things, small details at first, then larger ones. Tasks that once came effortlessly now felt overwhelming. She would stand in her kitchen, the place where she always felt most alive, and struggle to remember why she walked into the room. She worried the creative spark she had always depended on was dimming, and the fear that she was losing herself became almost unbearable. Rachael's husband, John, had been the first to notice the subtle changes. She recalled how he gently encouraged her to slow down, to seek medical advice, to give herself space to breathe. But she resisted. She didn't want to be seen as fragile. She didn't want her audience to worry. She had built a career on being the person who made others feel better. Who was she if she couldn't keep doing that? But eventually, she couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Medical tests, long conversations, and emotional breakdowns forced her to acknowledge that she had been pushing her body and mind beyond their limits. The stress, the grief, the overworking, they had all taken a toll she could no longer hide. She realized that healing wasn't something she could schedule between filming days or book tours. It required stepping back, something she had avoided her entire career. Her confession revealed just how much she had been enduring beneath the surface. She admitted she felt guilty for letting fans down, for slowing down projects, for appearing vulnerable. But as she opened up, she said she had finally learned the importance of letting people care for her. She spoke about the unexpected peace that came from accepting help, from allowing herself to cry, from acknowledging that even the strongest hearts can crack under pressure. She shared stories of quiet, days spent away from cameras, where she learned to reconnect with ordinary moments, brewing a cup of tea without rushing, sitting on her porch without thinking about the next episode to film, letting herself rest without guilt. These small steps became the foundation of her healing, each one teaching her that life wasn't measured by productivity alone. Rachael reflected on the letters she received from fans who had endured similar struggles, people who lost homes, loved ones, or their sense of direction. Their stories became a lifeline, reminding her she wasn't alone. She realized that breaking down wasn't a failure. It was a human response to unimaginable weight. Her message was clear. She wasn't giving up. She was choosing to rebuild carefully and intentionally. She wasn't stepping away from her audience forever. but she was finally giving herself permission to recover without apology. She asked her fans for patience, for understanding, and for something far harder to request space. And as she spoke, it became clear that this wasn't the end of Rachael Ray's journey. It was the beginning of a more honest, fragile, and profoundly human of her life. In the weeks after her emotional announcement, Rachael Ray retreated from the spotlight more fully than she ever had before. For the first time in decades, she wasn't waking up to a strict filming schedule, an overflowing inbox, or the pressure of creating content that would reach millions. Instead, she found herself sitting in the quiet stillness of her rebuilt home, quiet that felt both peaceful and unnervingly unfamiliar. It was in that stillness that she began confronting the parts of herself she had pushed aside for far too long. Rachael admitted that stepping away from her career, even temporarily, felt like losing a part of her identity. Cooking had always been more than her profession. It was the language through which she expressed love, comfort, and connection. Without cameras, audiences, or deadlines, she felt exposed, unsure how to navigate life without the constant hum of work to distract her. Yet, she also felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the freedom to breathe without performing. During this time, she began therapy, something she had avoided for most of her life. She explained that in her line of work, vulnerability is often seen as a weakness. But therapy became a place where she could unravel without judgment. Session by session, she learned to talk about the fear that lingered after the fire, the grief she had buried so deeply, and the anxiety that had quietly eroded her sense of peace. She discovered she had been carrying more pain than she was willing to admit. The emotional unraveling wasn't easy. Some mornings she woke up feeling strong. Others she struggled just to get dressed. But she learned that healing isn't a straight path. It dips, curves, and sometimes circles back before moving forward again. She realized she had spent years being so busy that she never allowed herself to experience her own emotions fully. Now, with time and space, the emotions came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes overwhelming. Still, there were moments of light that kept her going. She began cooking again, not for a show, not for a photo shoot, but simply because it made her feel alive. The act of chopping vegetables, simmering sauces, and kneading dough grounded her in ways she hadn't expected. It reminded her of the little girl she once was, learning to cook in her mother's kitchen long before fame entered the picture. Those quiet afternoons filled with simple meals and no expectations became a form of therapy all their own. Rachael also leaned deeply into her relationships. Her husband John became her anchor, offering steady support through her emotional ups and downs. She confessed that she had never allowed herself to be vulnerable with him to this degree, always choosing to play the role of caretaker. Now she learned the beauty of letting someone else take care of her. She reconnected with close friends, shared late-night conversations, and allowed herself to say out loud the fears she had kept hidden. Slowly, she began to rebuild not just her life, but her confidence. One of the hardest realizations she faced was how much of her identity had been tied to productivity. For years, she believed her value came from how much she could accomplish. But now, as she learned to sit with stillness, she began to understand something deeper. Worth isn't measured by output, but by the quiet courage to confront oneself honestly. It was this realization that helped her begin freeing herself from the relentless expectations she had lived under for so long. As weeks turned into months, Rachael found strength in small victories, sleeping through the night, enjoying a meal without anxiety, laughing without forcing it. Each moment became a reminder that healing wasn't just possible. It was already happening. She still had difficult days, but she no longer faced them alone or in silence. What surprised her most was how many people related to her journey. Through messages and letters, fans shared their own experiences with burnout, loss, and emotional fatigue. Their honesty formed a community of resilience around her, reinforcing the truth she had long ignored: she wasn't alone, and she never had been. By the end of this difficult, Rachael Ray emerged with a clearer understanding of herself, not the TV personality, not the businesswoman, but the human being. She wasn't fully healed yet, but she was stronger, more grounded, and finally on the path toward a life shaped not by obligation, but by intention. As Rachael Ray slowly found her footing again, a different kind of clarity began to emerge, one that came not from recovery alone, but from finally understanding what she wanted her future to look like. For the first time in her career, she was able to step back and see her life not as a continuous stream of deadlines, episodes, and commitments, but as something she could shape intentionally. This newfound perspective didn't arrive all at once. It came gradually through long conversations with loved ones, quiet mornings spent journaling, and the simple act of listening to her own thoughts without the noise of the world drowning them out. She explained that during her years on television, she had rarely allowed herself to imagine a life beyond the studio. Her schedule was so demanding that she often felt like she was running on autopilot, moving from task to task without time to process the emotional toll it took on her. But now, as she embraced the slower pace of life, she began to consider what she truly valued. She found herself longing for deeper connections, more meaningful work, and a lifestyle that didn't leave her feeling depleted by the end of every day. One of the most important changes she embraced was redefining success. In the past, success meant constant growth, more shows, more cookbooks, more appearances. It meant proving herself over and over. But now, she realized that success could also mean peace. It could mean waking up without anxiety, cooking for pleasure rather than production, and spending time with the people who made her feel grounded. She understood that stepping back wasn't losing. It was choosing a different kind of win. Rachael also took time to reevaluate her professional relationships. Over the years, her work had become intertwined with people who relied on her nonstop energy and creativity. She had always tried to meet every expectation, even when doing so left her drained. But as she healed, she saw how important it was to set boundaries, something she had never felt strong enough to do before. She began having honest conversations with her team, expressing what she could and could not handle. And instead of resistance, she found support. Her team wanted her healthy, not burned out. Another unexpected blessing came from reconnecting with her audience on a more human level. When she shared her struggles publicly, she worried it would make her appear weak or unreliable. Instead, it made her relatable in ways she had never experienced before. Fans wrote to her not just as viewers, but as people who understood what it felt like to lose something precious, to push themselves too far, or to break under pressure. Their empathy reminded her that vulnerability could be a bridge, not a barrier. Throughout this period, Rachael found healing in creativity again, but in a gentler way. She started developing recipes slowly, without deadlines, allowing inspiration to come naturally. Some days she cooked elaborate dishes. Other days she made simple meals that comforted her. She rediscovered the joy that originally brought her into the culinary world, the joy of feeding the soul, not just filling a plate. This time the creativity didn't feel like work. It felt like returning home to a part of herself she thought she'd lost. Despite her progress, she acknowledged that recovery isn't permanent or perfect. There were days when anxiety returned, when memories of the fire resurfaced, or when she felt overwhelmed by the future's uncertainty. But she no longer faced those moments with fear. Instead, she allowed herself to feel them fully, knowing that healing wasn't linear and that she wasn't defined by her struggles. What mattered most was that she was no longer hiding. She wasn't pretending to be the endlessly energetic host who never needed rest. She wasn't pushing through pain to maintain an image. She was showing up as a real person, flaws and all, and that authenticity brought her a peace she had never known. As she looked ahead, Rachael Ray didn't claim to have all the answers. But she knew this. She wanted a life shaped by intention, compassion, and balance. A life where she could create without pressure, love without distraction, and live without the weight of pretending she had everything under control. She promised her audience that while this of her life was painful, it also opened a door to something more meaningful. And she was finally ready to walk through it.